Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Archean fleshly body. Archean cultivation base. When the power of Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body and cultivation base combined, he began to pulse with an energy akin to an ancestral awakening. The sky flashed with wild colors, winds screamed, and the eternal immortal domains quaked. All living beings were shaken to the core. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes glittered brightly. He had come under a lot of pressure in recent days, so while this dramatic rise in battle prowess didn't alleviate the brewing crisis of the mortal renegade, it at least relieved it a bit. As his fleshly body broke through, his powers of regeneration grew even more focused, causing his injuries to rapidly heal. Soon, he was back to normal, and even beyond that, to the point where the flame of his life force burned like an invisible sun. Eternal Mother. Looking up, he fixed his gaze on the bell, and began to walk forward. It took a single step, and he was there in front of it, where he reached out with his hand, not to attack with his fist, but to casually strike it with his palm. His movement seemed ordinary in nature, but contained massive, destructive force. The bell tolled, and the little turtle gasped. As for the Saint Emperor, he was yet again flabbergasted, and couldn't contain his shock. That palm strike, he could tell that the energy unleashed by the palm strike was formidable, but was not very focused, and allowed much of the energy behind it to disperse. That was what caused the strange phenomena. It was a result of simply not utilizing this divine ability to the fullest extent possible. The higher one's cultivation base was, and the greater one's command of magic, the more likely something like this was to occur. It was like a natural reaction. Bai Xiaochun's seemingly ordinary palm strike did not shake heaven and earth, and yet, revealed how tightly connected his cultivation base and fleshly body were. It was something that many people in the eternal immortal domains would call the aura of an ancestor, and was what the Saint Emperor had just called the ancestor realm. Of course, the ancestor realm was not a cultivation level, but rather, something that was described in ancient records when someone's cultivation base and fleshly body combined perfectly. And according to the ancient records, only the three ancestors themselves had ever done something like this. Perhaps people with lower cultivation bases could manage to achieve something similar, but their combination would not result in this sort of energy. Only someone in the Archean realm could do something so profoundly shocking. It was a state in which one could converge the energy of heaven and earth into one spot, and use it to crush anything in one's path. When Bai Xiaochun's palm strike landed, the bell emitted a sound that was vastly louder than anything from before. The entire semi-transparent bell began to twist and distort, almost as if it were about to break. Heaven shaking, earth-shattering rumbling sounds could be heard, and a massive burst of backlash power flooded out toward Bai Xiaochun, like an invisible wave that instantly swept over him completely. Before, he might have been able to survive, but his powers of regeneration would not have been able to keep up with the effects. But now, things were different. Eyes shining, he didn't even take a step back. He kept his hand placed on the surface of the bell, almost as if he were absorbing the backlash. His expression was the same as ever as his 5 yin organs were quickly repaired, and sent out power that not only dispersed the effects of the backlash, but also healed him. The process takes a while to describe, but happened in only a single breath of time. After the terrifying backlash power was negated, Bai Xiaochun chuckled, and struck the bell again. This time, he didn't stop. It was as if he wouldn't give up until the Eternal Mother woke up. Without stopping, he let loose 8 more palm strikes. Counting the blows he had unleashed before, he had now struck the bell nearly 30 times. Booms filled heaven and earth, and the bell continued to distort. The backlash attacks continued, but Bai Xiaochun didn't stop. As his undying codex worked at full speed, he experienced something like a physically comfortable baptism. 31 palm strikes. 32. With each palm strike, he felt more comfortable than before, almost as though countless tiny hands were slowly massaging him inside and out. Even his soul was affected, filling him with a pleasurable sensation that pushed him to the point of forgetting about the Eternal Mother, and focusing completely on the feeling. And thus, he struck out 33 times. 34, 35, 40 times. With the 40th blow, the pleasurable sensation reached an incredible height, causing him to gasp and pant loudly, but only for a moment. When he realized what he was doing, he quickly closed his mouth. The more than 10 blows he had struck caused the eternal river to tremble everywhere, and struck the inhabitants of the lands with profound shock. Heavens! How many times is the Arch-Emperor going to strike that bell? For some reason, it almost seems like he's enjoying himself. Look at his facial expression. Meanwhile, the Saint Emperor and the little turtle were struck as mute as wooden chickens. Not only were they shocked that Bai Xiaochun was still going, they were flabbergasted by the look of pleasure on his face. And the truth was, although the people in the eternal immortal domains hadn't noticed how he had begun to pant earlier, the Saint Emperor and the little turtle had been right there, and had heard it clearly. He's enjoying it, the Saint Emperor thought, a strange expression appearing on his face. He simply didn't understand why Bai Xiaochun would look like this. It was really a very odd facial expression. And from the way he was striking the bell, it seemed like he didn't want to ever stop. And that was the truth. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were shining as he was baptized by the backlashes, prompting him to strike the bell over and over without cease. 50, 60, 70. The tolling of the bell shook the entire world, and caused huge waves to surge on the eternal sea and the eternal river. As for the light that represented the Eternal Mother, it was flickering even more brightly, and seemed to be just on the verge of waking up. Eventually, to the shock and excitement of the little turtle and the Saint Emperor, and to the astonishment of the other inhabitants of the lands, that light suddenly began to shrink in on itself, transforming into an enormous eye. It was closed, but almost immediately began to tremble. Then, with Bai Xiaochun's final strike on the bell, it slowly opened. The Eternal Mother was waking up. As the eye opened, the eternal immortal domains were bathed with radiant light. All of the plants and vegetation, all of the mountains and rivers, all of the various people, began to shine brightly. From a position far out in the void, it was as if the eternal immortal domains were a spectacularly glowing flower, right in the middle of the process of blooming. At the same time, an indescribable warmth embraced all living things, regardless of the level of their cultivation base, something intimate, like the touch of a mother upon her child. Eternal Mother, the Saint Emperor breathed, trembling with excitement. He quickly clasped hands and bowed. The little turtle looked on with wide eyes, feeling a little guilty as he backed up. Hiding behind the Saint Emperor, he peeked around to look at the Eternal Mother, incarnated in the form of an eye. Bai Xiaochun was also overwhelmed by that motherly sensation, and bowed deeply. Greetings, Eternal Mother. Everyone in the eternal immortal domains was looking up at the image in the sky, their eyes wide, their souls stirring, their blood pumping with an intimate, warm feeling. This was the mother of them all, the source of all their bloodlines. The Eternal Mother. Neither the Saint Emperor nor Bai Xiaochun could control the reactions coming from their own blood. To them, the eye inside the bell was like a blooming flower that they instinctively felt intimately close to. Suddenly, all of the eternal immortal domains smelled like a fragrant flower. Even the void around the world was affected as dazzling light shone out in all directions. Only the hulking mortal renegade remained completely still and unmoving, his powerful aura of murder and death suppressing the life force and the fragrant aroma. In all of the eternal immortal domains, the only one to react differently was the little turtle. He seemed to take it all in stride, and actually hid behind the Saint Emperor, not willing to show his face. As everyone was shaken, the eye of the Eternal Mother looked around, seemingly confused. She had been asleep for a long time, and apparently, was having trouble reconciling the dreams she had experienced with reality. After a long moment passed, she spoke to the still bowed Bai Xiaochun and Saint Emperor, her voice slow and halting. Why did you wake me? Her voice was not awe-inspiring, but rather, warm. She truly seemed like a mother who had been woken up by her children, and was both smiling and sighing at the same time. The warm feeling in Bai Xiaochun's heart caused him to feel more than ever like he was in front of his own mother. It was the same with the Saint Emperor. The two of them took a deep breath, and then the Saint Emperor took a step forward and began to speak in a very respectful voice. The enemy from beyond is on the verge of waking up, and we have no way to resist him. Thus, we woke you up. Eternal Mother, please give us your approval to become sovereigns, so that we can fight the enemy from beyond. The Saint Emperor spoke with the utmost politeness, almost as if it were instinct for him to do so, and his expression was one of complete reverence. The Eternal Mother was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she murmured, the mortal renegade is going to break free. Then, she sent out some divine scents, which rose up and swirled around the mortal renegade for a moment before fading away. At that point, Bai Xiaochun and the Saint Emperor heard another sigh. When it is time to live, live. When it is time to die, die. There was once no reincarnation. Only after hope came to exist did reincarnation come to be. There was once no eternal. However, after hope came to exist, the eternal came to be. Long ago, I was not conscious. But in a moment of deadly crisis, I instinctively developed consciousness, and sent forth 3 seeds, which became 3 children. It seems I only managed to delay things. I have no way to end the catastrophe of nirvanic extermination. What a pity. Sealing the mortal renegade sent me into a deep sleep, and despite having been awoken, I'm not back at my peak state. I have no more power of approval left. At the most, I can approve of one of you to become a half-sovereign. Although the Eternal Mother's voice was warm, upon listening to it more closely, it did not seem to contain much emotion. However, it was sincere. Clearly, it was just as she had said. Upon awakening, she did not possess the power she once had in the past. One might think that it was a simple thing to offer approval for an Archean to rise to a higher level. But the truth was that it required the Eternal Mother to call upon the power of essence, which would become a branding mark that would be placed onto the Archean. Her response caused Bai Xiaochun's expression to flicker and then darken a bit. As for the Saint Emperor, he sagged in place, his face ashen. Before, all of his hope had been placed on the Eternal Mother, but now that she was awake, that hope was turning into despair. Half-sovereign, he muttered bitterly. From the Eternal Mother's words, he could tell that the path to becoming a sovereign had truly been severed. I can't remain awake for long. To remain awake for longer than 10 breaths of time requires that I take a day of life away from all living beings in the world, my children. Hurry and make your decision. Her voice was weak, and the glowing light that represented her began to darken as the eyes slowly started to close. In his bitterness, the Saint Emperor looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun stood there silently. The truth was that he did not feel bitter like the Saint Emperor. He didn't want to become a half-sovereign, that was pointless, and would not secure a victory against the mortal renegade. Taking a deep breath, he clasped hands, bowed to the Eternal Mother, and then quietly said, "Eternal Mother, I would like to ask a question. Is it really required to get your approval to become a sovereign? Isn't there another way?" The ball of light that was the Eternal Mother flickered, and the slowly closing eye suddenly snapped open, and focused on the child of hers that stood in front of her. A moment later, her soft voice could once again be heard. "So, it was you who woke me. I can sense the fluctuations of your blood. In some respects, you have already surpassed my other 3 children. And I can sense that you have acquired a chi flow that doesn't belong to me. Unfortunately, the natural laws in this starry sky dictate that sovereigns can only be born along with the approval of the will of a world. There is no other way." The Eternal Mother's reply caused Bai Xiaochun to sink into silence. He still didn't understand. Although it was true that the approval of a world could give birth to a sovereign, he knew that many years ago, one person had become a sovereign without the will of a world. In fact, that person had destroyed worlds. The mortal renegade. Bai Xiaochun had witnessed that personally via the memories of the worldly Taoist. He also knew that the mortal renegade's rise to the sovereign level had something to do with his Tao. That much he had learned with the help of the worldly Taoist himself, in the Valley of the Clouds. It was possible to understand the mortal renegade's Tao by looking at the state of the surrounding void. It was populated by nothing but ruins, with all life force having been eradicated. All heaven and earth had been extinguished, casting everything into darkness. The mortal renegade's Tao was to exterminate everything, and that was how he had become a sovereign. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered, and he looked over at the glowing light of the Eternal Mother. The mortal renegade's sovereign path did not require the approval of a world. So how did he do it? If he could succeed, then why does becoming a sovereign require the approval of a world? Yet again, the Eternal Mother's eye snapped open, and this time, it shone with unrivaled splendor. It was as if Bai Xiaochun's words had been filled with a bizarre power that caused the eternal river to tremble, and the eternal immortal domains to shake physically. To the Eternal Mother, it was as if his words had somehow stirred the foundation of some natural law. Even the Saint Emperor and the little turtle could tell that the Eternal Mother's eye had opened wider than before, as though she were now completely and utterly focused on Bai Xiaochun alone. It almost seemed as if she were inspecting him on the deepest of all levels. Shaken, Bai Xiaochun stood there, looking at the Eternal Mother. After a long moment, she retracted her divine sense. Sounding weaker than ever, she said one last thing to Bai Xiaochun. "If nirvanic extermination can birth a sovereign, perhaps the opposite can too." The instant Bai Xiaochun heard her words, his previously grim eyes began to shine brightly. "If nirvanic extermination can birth a sovereign," Bai Xiaochun murmured, "perhaps the opposite can too." The words struck his mind and heart like heavenly thunder, completely rocking his world, and at the same time, opening up a new door for him. Although he had already begun to suspect that this was the case, he had no hard evidence to rely on to prove it true. But the Eternal Mother had confirmed his speculations. Considering what had been proved by the mortal renegade's Tao, he now had a direction to move in. It was impossible to say whether he would succeed. However, he knew that becoming a half-sovereign was not what he wanted. He wanted something that would give more hope than a half-sovereign could. That was the only way he could really go for broke when the mortal renegade woke up. Bai Xiaochun had truly changed on a deep level. By now, he was nearly the complete antithesis of that carefree youngster who had once stood atop Mount Hood. Over the years, he had turned into the type of person who bore incredible weight on his shoulders, weight that forced the youngster he had once been to grow up. Eventually, he left the Eternal River, parting ways with the Eternal Mother and taking the relieved little turtle with him. The Saint Emperor stayed behind. Considering that there were no other options, he chose to become a half-sovereign. It wasn't a selfish choice. He could see that Bai Xiaochun had already picked a new direction, and in order to offer as much assistance as possible in fighting the coming catastrophe, he chose to sacrifice some of his own potential to at least have a measure of power. As Bai Xiaochun made his way off, the Saint Emperor took a deep breath and sat down cross-legged in front of the bell. Slowly, the light of the Eternal Mother wrapped him up. As of this moment, the two most powerful individuals in the eternal immortal domains were doing what they could to protect their homes, their friends, and their families. Bai Xiaochun returned to Arch-Emperor City and went into secluded meditation, although not for long. 7 days later, he emerged from this private chamber, where he issued an official dharmic decree as the Arch-Emperor. Everyone in the eternal immortal domains, whether you are in the celestial realm, the demigod realm, the diva realm, or the nascent soul stage, I need your help to quarantine the enemy from beyond. Before long, a windstorm of activity overtook the eternal immortal domains. If the Saint Emperor had issued such a proclamation, it would also have resulted in activity. However, it would not have had the same result as Bai Xiaochun speaking the words. All living beings in the eternal immortal domains had witnessed him sealing the enemy from beyond, defeating his attempt to bind the world, and awakening the Eternal Mother. He was now the true hope of the eternal immortal domains. In some respects, his words carried almost the same weight as the Eternal Mother's. And to many people, he had actually surpassed her. He was the true ruler of the eternal immortal domains. A multitude of cultivators began to converge on Arch-Emperor City. Nascent soul cultivators, devas, demigods, and even celestials all came. Before long, more details came to light about Bai Xiaochun's plan to quarantine the enemy. For one thing, he was worried that the sealing strip which currently restrained the mortal renegade would not last long enough. And unfortunately, he had no idea how long it would take him to break out of the Archean realm. Perhaps he could do it quickly, perhaps not. Maybe he would fail. Regardless, the only way he could confidently make his attempt was if he had enough time to work with. He needed to make sure that, even if the sealing strip was destroyed, there was a second sealing magic in place to buy more time. The 7 days he had spent in secluded meditation upon returning had been for the purpose of collecting his thoughts and planning how to create the perfect spell formation for the situation. When everyone was gathered, Bai Xiaochun explained the details of his plan. The foundation of this sealing formation will be the energy of the eternal immortal domains as a whole. And I will guide it with my magic of the essence of time, gravitational extermination. I will create something like the area outside of a world I once visited, a place I call the Hourglass World. It will be a grand time formation. It will distort time and space, and seal everything surrounding the mortal renegade. It will have millions and millions of formation nodes, each one of which will be connected to someone in the eternal immortal domains. In other words, the formation will be powered by the people of our lands. If it works, then when the mortal renegade awakens, it will at least delay him for a bit longer, and buy us some extra time. To a people who were in the grips of despair, this plan truly seemed like the only chance for survival. No one opposed it. Without hesitation, all of the cultivators in the eternal immortal domains agreed to go along with the plan. In the following days, Bai Xiaochun led the effort to set up the huge spell formation around the mortal renegade. Furthermore, he began to work with his essence of time, breaking it up into innumerable gravitational seeds, which he then delivered into the hands of the cultivators under his command. The vast group of cultivators absorbed the gravitational seeds, which linked them to the spell formation. Eventually, even the plants, trees, mountains, rivers, and other physical aspects of the lands were imbued with gravitational seeds from Bai Xiaochun. Slowly but surely, the spell formation was reaching a state of completion. It did not require any specific materials to create, only the people and physical aspects of the eternal immortal domains. Everyone joined in the effort, including Bai Xiaochun's family. Bai Xiaochun also linked himself to the spell formation. After all the preparations were complete, he flew up into the sky, and under the watchful eyes of everyone in the lands, waved his hand, activating his gravitational extermination formation around the mortal renegade. Looking down, the people, plants, and major terrain features in the eternal immortal domains glowed like stars, and sent streaming starlight up into the sky to power the gravitational extermination formation. Slowly but surely, the majestic formation began to activate. From the look of it, it would take several hours for the entire process to complete. But then, even as Bai Xiaochun performed double-handed incantation gestures to spread the effects of gravitational extermination, and even as the starlight rose up from the countless locations below, the mortal renegade seemed to instinctively sense what was happening, and shivered. Then, Bai Xiaochun's face fell as, all of a sudden, a vortex appeared on the mortal renegade's forehead. As it spun, a figure slowly took shape inside it. He wore a Taoist robe, and was completely expressionless, except for the cruel glint in his eyes. As he walked out, his facial features became clear, causing Bai Xiaochun to gasp, and his eyes to glitter brightly. Taoist Heavenspan. It truly was none other than Taoist Heavenspan. Truth be told, Bai Xiaochun was not very surprised. He hadn't ever been able to track down Taoist Heavenspan in the Vile Emperor dynasty, and had speculated that something like this might have happened. And considering everything that had happened in the Heavenspan realm, and what Bai Xiaochun knew of the man, he really did resemble the mortal renegade in many ways. The fact that the Vile Emperor had been a clone of the mortal renegade led Bai Xiaochun to certain speculations about what had happened to Taoist Heavenspan. Seeing him now made everything clear. The mortal renegade couldn't personally do anything about the spell formation being set up around him, and therefore, had no choice other than to send Taoist Heavenspan in his stead. Well, that's fine. It's time to settle matters between us anyway. Eyes flashing, Bai Xiaochun flew directly toward Taoist Heavenspan. Taoist Heavenspan hovered there right in front of the mortal renegade's forehead, his eyes cold but flickering with mixed emotions as he looked out at Bai Xiaochun approaching. Things had happened just as Bai Xiaochun had suspected. However, not even Taoist Heavenspan could have guessed what would happen after he became a follower of the Vile Emperor. Everything had changed because of a single black stone. Because of that stone, he didn't need the approval of the Eternal Mother to achieve the breakthrough he had long sought. From the moment he acquired it, he knew that there was something inside of the black stone, a will, someone who somehow enabled him to fool the will of the Eternal Mother and become a celestial. His rapid cultivation-based progress in subsequent days had also been because of that black stone. And every so often, the Vile Emperor would give him another stone. Eventually, he realized that he was not himself anymore. And that was when, with the help of the Vile Emperor, he became aware of the true might of the mortal renegade, who hung above in the heavens. It wasn't a difficult decision for him. He did not hesitate to betray the eternal immortal domains and become a subordinate of the mortal renegade. He was different from the Vile Emperor, who was only a clone. Taoist Heavenspan became the apprentice of the mortal renegade. He knew that in many ways, he was like the mortal renegade. In all the years that had passed, he was the only person from the eternal immortal domains who had chosen to truly submit to the mortal renegade, and had thus received his approval. Therefore, he left Vile Emperor City and appeared within the body of the mortal renegade, where his cultivation advanced with unprecedented quickness. After emulating the Tao of the mortal renegade, he gained access to divine abilities and magical techniques that he could never have grasped before. It was in that manner that he became an Archean, and an even stronger one than the Vile Emperor had been. Everything he possessed came from the mortal renegade. After all, in some ways, the mortal renegade was a world unto himself, with a will that could give approval. Just like the Eternal Mother, he could produce powerful experts of his own. During this process, Taoist Heavenspan lost himself, and knew it. To achieve his goals, he had become completely ruthless and selfish to the extreme. And yet, he still remembered a time in the past when he had not been like that. Occasionally, he would reminisce, and although the memories seemed like those of a stranger, he still remembered that he had a daughter. Perhaps that's just the price I have to pay. Sighing inwardly, he severed such thoughts, and his eyes glinted with icy coldness. Up to now, he had been in meditation. But then, the will of the mortal renegade had reached out to him, explaining that his mission was to defend against all outside threats. The now dead clone had been tasked with the same mission. And if things had gone according to plan, matters would have proceeded smoothly until the mortal renegade awoke. But then Bai Xiaochun returned, cut down the impostor Vile Emperor, and forced the mortal renegade to advance his plans. Then, as the moment of awakening drew near, Bai Xiaochun began to set up a spell formation backed by the essence of time, which the mortal renegade sensed was a major threat. Therefore, Taoist Heavenspan appeared to act as Tao protector, and eliminate the threat. Bai Xiaochun, he growled, his eyes flashing. Striding out toward the incoming Bai Xiaochun, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, causing 9 sealing marks to appear. Immediately, they began to grow larger, becoming 9 gigantic lanterns. A moment later, one of the 9 lanterns was extinguished, causing black smoke to belch out, which became a huge hand that shot toward Bai Xiaochun. The energy radiating off of the hand was comparable to the peak of the Archean realm, a force that far surpassed what the vile emperor had been capable of. And yet, now that Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body had been tempered by striking the bell of the Eternal Mother, it was so weak that he didn't even need to think about it. As the hand approached, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered with hatred for Taoist Heavenspan. Performing a quick incantation gesture, he waved his right hand, causing numerous beams of Archean luminescence to shoot out. And thus, a battle of divine abilities began. Booms rang out as a second lantern was extinguished, then a third and a fourth, sending one black hand after another toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun performed more incantation gestures, causing the power of both his fleshly body and cultivation base to skyrocket. Then, he unleashed his undying sovereign's fist, smashing all of the black hands into pieces. Frowning, Taoist Heavenspan extinguished all of his remaining lanterns, and again formed several black hands. Then, the smoke from the previously shattered hands swept toward them, and all of the hands and smoke merged to create a huge giant that charged toward Bai Xiaochun, howling. All this took only a few breaths of time. Divine abilities slammed into each other, sending shockwaves out in all directions. As for all of the cultivators down below in the eternal immortal domains, they looked on in complete shock. Taoist Heavenspan, so, he's with the enemy from beyond. Damn it, if I'd known it would end up like this, I would have killed him years ago. The Celestials belonging to the former vile Emperor dynasty all looked on with cold, murderous gazes. However, they all knew that this version of Taoist Heavenspan was someone none of them were qualified to fight against. They could only hope that Bai Xiaochun would prevail. Up above, Bai Xiaochun performed an incantation gesture, causing everything around him to distort as he called on the essence of time. Instantly, the huge giant slowed down, allowing Bai Xiaochun to pierce directly through it. As his undying codex regenerated him, he became like a sharp sword stabbing toward Taoist Heavenspan. Eyes flashing, Taoist Heavenspan waved his hands out and said, "Starry sky, nirvanic extermination." In response, an image of a starry sky appeared around him. It featured innumerable glittering stars, each of which represented worlds filled with people. But then, in a short moment, the entire image began to turn dark. As it did, the sky of the eternal immortal domains also began to turn completely black. Meanwhile, Taoist Heavenspan's voice seemed to contain a will of nirvanic extermination, which turned the dark sky into a huge face that lunged down to consume Bai Xiaochun. Strangely, although the face resembled Taoist Heavenspan, if one looked closely, it actually looked more like the mortal renegade. The face seemed capable of inflicting nirvanic extermination on anything it touched. Even the sky began to wither. This divine ability surpassed anything the vile emperor had used. This came from the Tao of the mortal renegade. It was being wielded by Taoist Heavenspan, but it was still a magic of nirvanic extermination. As it spread, the spell formation, which had not yet been completely formed, began to show signs of being corroded. Clearly, it would only be a short time before it was completely destroyed. It wasn't a matter of the spell formation being weak, but rather, the fact that it was incomplete. Had it been complete, Taoist Heavenspan would have had a very difficult time doing anything to it. I have to end this fight quickly, Bai Xiaochun thought. Without any hesitation, he shot forward, waving his hand. "Water swamp," he shouted. Intense rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth as water vapor roiled out, creating a huge swamp. It was almost like an ocean, and as it formed, a beastly roar rose up from inside of it. It was none other than Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit. Apparently, the creature had learned from its previous mistake, and instead of reaching out with its claws first, its head appeared, crocodilian and fierce to the extreme, with rows of sharp teeth as large as mountains. Filling nearly half the sky, it lunged toward the face of nirvanic extermination. It was so huge that just its head filled half the sky, and thus, it could only be imagined how large its body was. Clearly, the eternal immortal domains couldn't even sustain such a large entity. Mortals usually think that things which are large in size are particularly powerful. But cultivators view things differently, and are impressed by large things only when they reach a certain, completely exaggerated level. And right now, all the cultivators who could see this head were shivering in terror. Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit was just ridiculously massive. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun's water swamp kingdom had grown with him as his cultivation base advanced. Earlier, he had used the technique inside the body of the mortal renegade, where no one could see it. But right now, numerous gasps could be heard as people finally caught sight of it with their own eyes. That was especially true of the disciples from the former Spirit Stream sect. Li Qinghao's jaw dropped, and Patriarch Spirit Stream stared in shock. After all, even though the Water Swamp Kingdom was difficult to cultivate, there had been people who had succeeded with it throughout history. And yet, compared to Bai Xiaochun's Water Swamp Kingdom, all of those previous versions seemed like knockoffs. In fact, the people from the Spirit Stream sect even began to wonder if the divine ability from their sect had been the real thing. That's the Water Swamp Kingdom? Even Bai Xiaochun's family was shocked. Song Junwan gasped, and both Dabao and Xiaoxiao were visibly stunned by the enormous, vicious crocodilian head. As everyone looked on, stunned, Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit snapped up the face of nirvanic extermination. But then, apparently not satisfied, it unhesitatingly shot toward the mortal renegade. Not even Taoist Heavenspan could keep himself from feeling shocked by what he was seeing. Eyes nearly popping out of his skull, he blurted, "What is that thing?" Taoist Heavenspan's scalp was tingling on the verge of exploding. This was the first time since he became an apprentice of the mortal renegade that he had felt so shaken. In fact, a sensation of deadly crisis had already gripped his heart. Not daring to hesitate, he backed up as if he planned to go back into the mortal renegade's forehead. Unfortunately for him, Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit was too fast, and blocked his path. Defiance rose up in Taoist Heavenspan as a feeling of impending death overtook him. To him, it felt like he had been involved in a sword fight, only to have his opponent throw down his sword and then pull out a mountain to crush him with. The life essence spirit was like heaven and earth, and Taoist Heavenspan was like an ant. The mortal renegade's head was actually much larger than the life essence spirit, and yet, it ravenously opened its jaws as if to take a bite. The people of the eternal immortal domains were as stunned as wooden chickens, and even Bai Xiaochun was sweating nervously. He was almost considering calling his life essence spirit back, but it was too late. Before he could do anything, the creature bit down onto the mortal renegade. A crunching sound rang out, which was like an explosion that caused all heaven and earth to distort. Then, a blood-curdling scream erupted from Bai Xiaochun's life essence spirit, and a few of its mountain-like teeth fell out. However, the life essence spirit apparently did get a chunk of rock-like flesh, whereupon it lunged back into the swamp and disappeared. The people of the eternal immortal domains looked on in shock, and Taoist Heavenspan glanced around, apparently surprised to still be alive. Sweat dripping down his face, he shot into the mortal renegade's forehead, not even looking over his shoulder. As for the mortal renegade, two enormous teeth were still stuck into his face, surrounded by numerous cracks and crevices. It was a really odd sight. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Even in a somber and dramatic fight like this, he was still able to do what he usually did, and make things amusing. Although Bai Xiaochun wasn't happy that Taoist Heavenspan had escaped, the look of stupefaction on his face had been worth it. He ran too quickly this time, that's all. Snorting coldly, he waved his right hand, and the spell formation of the essence of time began to form together again. As for the shocked cultivators down below, they all went back to their work from moments before. This time, Taoist Heavenspan didn't interfere. As starlight streamed up from below, the huge spell formation formed around the mortal renegade. As it completed, the essence of time swirled, forming something like an enormous vortex. It was a vortex of innumerable stars, each of which was part of the spell formation. Within it was the power of essence, which caused all of the time in the area to slow down. And that was the main purpose of the formation. Not only would it slow down time to prevent the seal from unraveling too soon, but it would buy them time in general. Now that the spell formation was operational, Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief. At that point, he looked at the mortal renegade's forehead, and then, the teeth sticking into his face. It was a strange thing. Why did the teeth remain after the life essence spirit vanished? Contemplating the matter, he headed back down to the eternal immortal domains. Upon arriving in Arch-Emperor City, some of his subordinates delivered the teeth that had fallen from his life essence spirit. Ignoring the strange looks on the faces of his subordinates, he studied the teeth for a while before putting them into his bag of holding. After all, if his life essence spirit showed up next time missing a bunch of teeth, it would look really ugly. Sighing, Bai Xiaochun once again wondered why things always got strange around him. It was obviously a very serious situation. Scratching his head, he put the matter aside and went to find his Taoist partners. After all, his Water Swamp Kingdom had eased some of the tension, but that didn't change the potential for impending destruction of a cataclysmic nature. The Saint Emperor becoming a half-sovereign wasn't the answer to the problem. Everything would come down to Bai Xiaochun and whether or not he could succeed. Right now, he needed to go into secluded meditation, and for how long, no one knew. When he came out, it could be right into a deadly situation. It was impossible to say what things would be like. Therefore, the only thing he could think to do now was send his friends and family to the treasured fan, where they could hopefully remain safe. However, whether it was Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, or Hu Xiaomei, none of them agreed. Neither did Dabao or Xiaoxiao. The giant ghost king, Li Qinghao, and everyone else all felt the same. What would be the point of that? Song Junwan said softly, if the eternal immortal domains go away, do you really think that we can just live on some fan? Like you said, the mortal renegade seeks to exterminate all of the starry sky. All people. Maybe we could escape one disaster, but it would only be delaying the inevitable. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.